take you to Hong Kong now, where they are marking the one-year anniversary of a major demonstration that marked a turning point in the successful bid to stop an extradition bill. Hundreds of people have gathered inside the Sha Tin Newtown Plaza, which has previously seen clashes between protesters and police. Public gatherings, remember, they are banned in Hong Kong right now. The government says it wants to prevent the spread of coronavirus. And we know we've seen armed riot police. This is the live pictures that we have right now, and you can see them right there. They are outside the shopping centre, and they are on loudspeaker calling on those protesters to disperse. Things have been very peaceful there so far, though. So let's take you live now to Beijing. We can speak to Andy Mok, who is a senior research fellow at the Centre for China and Globalization, China's leading think tank. So, Andy, once again, there we see the protesters out on the street despite the COVID-19 restrictions, and they are determined once again that their voice will be heard. Do you understand their anger?
I do. They are very upset. I think it's clear that a number of Hong Kongers have legitimate grievances that they've made very clear. What I think is perhaps less clear to some Hong Kongers is that are they addressing the root cause of their problem? And is this the right way to go about it? So, of course, Hong Kong, with its one country, two systems, has a system that is different from China, although it is a part of China. Peaceful protests that are lawful, that are approved by the police, are allowed. But what we've seen beginning last year was a completely different form of behavior.
But to be clear, they think and feel that the root cause of the problem is an erosion of their autonomy and their freedom, of what makes them unique as Hong Kongers.
Sure, and I think that is clearly a message that some of the protesters have been communicating. It's gotten a lot of mainstream Western media coverage. But I think that we also need to understand that these protests are not happening in a vacuum. And the bigger picture here is that the US and China are engaged in a geopolitical contest that I think officially kicked off when the US in 2017 announced its national security strategy, released its national security strategy, which labeled China and Russia as adversaries.
But Andy, when you speak to protesters, and I have many times, they don't talk about a big geopolitical situation. They talk about their anger, their absolute dismay, that they feel their freedoms are being eroded, that we are actually seeing an end to one country, two systems. And they're not the only ones. We've also had Britain today criticising China as well for breaching the joint declaration.
Yes, absolutely. So, and again, where I was going with this was that I think a key part of the US playbook is to engage in subversion and the overthrowing of legitimate governments. We've seen this around the world, from Guatemala, Chile, Iran, Iraq. I think a particularly appalling and shocking case of this is in Indonesia, where in October 2017, the National Security Archive released a batch of US diplomatic cables showing that the US actively participated in the mass slaughter of an estimated 1 million Indonesians in 1965. And the CIA itself deemed this as one of the most atrocious mass murders in 20th century history, on par with the Russian purges and the Nazi extermination of the Jews. Now, if we asked a lot of these Indonesians that were part of this massacre, are they participating in a geopolitical contest between the US and the Soviet Union, I think all of them would have said no. They're fighting against, they're protecting their country. They're fighting against domestic subversion. So I think that this is where some of these protesters innocently believe they're fighting for freedom or to protect their vision of freedom. But I think an important contributor to this is the motivation of countries that see China as an adversary.
Okay,
that is to
Andy,
say,
we have to leave it there. Andy Mok, thank you very much for joining us from Beijing. And in the next